In a world flooded with quick answers and urgent exits, there lies a quiet stirring, barely audible, that asks you to stay. Stay, not because it's easy, not because it makes sense, but because something sacred whispers, this isn't over yet. Sometimes when everyone tells you to move on, heaven tells you to wait. There is a peculiar kind of peace that emerges, not when everything is certain, but when everything around you suggests uncertainty, and yet your heart remains still. It doesn't make sense to the rational mind. Logic tells you to walk away, to let go, to start over. Yet something sacred within you keeps whispering, stay, wait, trust. This is not the peace that the world gives. This is divine peace, placed there by a power greater than yourself. When God asks you not to move on from someone, He doesn't always make it known through fireworks or booming voices. More often He wraps you in a calm that doesn't match your circumstances. It's the kind of peace that shows up in the middle of confusion. You don't know what the future holds. You don't have clarity. You may even feel heartbreak. But beneath all of that noise there is a current of stillness that seems untouched. This peace is not an accident, it is confirmation. When something is truly over, there's a different kind of energy. It's heavy, it's cloudy. Even when you try to cling to it, it slips through your fingers like sand. But when God isn't done writing the story between two people, He won't let the peace leave you, even when everything else seems broken. You'll find yourself confused in your mind, but settled in your spirit. And in those moments, you have to listen not to the chaos outside, but to the stillness within. Divine peace is not always about comfort, it's about alignment. It means your soul is walking in step with a higher purpose, even when your emotions are lagging behind. This is where discernment becomes more important than advice. Well-meaning people may urge you to move on. They will tell you to protect your heart, to find someone new, to let time do the healing. But time does not heal what God still holds together, and peace does not lie. You may look back at your journal entries, your prayers, your conversations with God, and see a pattern. Despite your efforts to detach, the peace never left. Despite your moments of weakness and confusion, you felt grounded in the idea that this person, this connection, was not yet complete. That's not wishful thinking. That's spiritual sensitivity. That's being in tune with the voice of the one who sees the end from the beginning. There is a sacred waiting that God sometimes asks of us, not as punishment, but as preparation. He knows what needs to heal. He knows what must grow. And He often works behind the scenes in silence, because growth is rarely noisy. But in the silence He offers peace as proof. Peace becomes the language of divine direction. It tells you when to act and when to be still. And if you still feel peace when you think of them, if peace surrounds the very thought of holding on, it may be because God is still authoring that chapter. Divine peace is never frantic. It doesn't rush, it doesn't push, it allows room for surrender without desperation. When God is in it, He replaces anxiety with assurance. Not the kind of assurance that promises a fairy tale ending, but the kind that promises that your waiting is not in vain, that you are not foolish for hoping, that you are not weak for still loving, that what He has joined no man can truly separate, not even time, distance, or misunderstanding. So if you are in a place of uncertainty, and yet you feel strangely still, pay attention. That stillness is not absence. It's presence. It's the presence of a peace that transcends all understanding, anchoring you when nothing else makes sense, and in that peace God speaks the loudest. Sometimes the universe speaks in a whisper, not through grand revelations but through subtle, repeated moments that feel too aligned to ignore. You see a name pop up at the strangest times. A song that once belonged to a memory finds you in a random place. A phrase that was spoken years ago echoes again in a stranger's voice. These are not accidents. They are recurring confirmations, gentle reminders that God is still weaving something through the chaos of your daily life. When God is asking you not to move on from someone, He often doesn't say it directly. Instead, He allows life to echo His intentions. You might run into their sibling, hear their favorite artist in an unexpected place, or stumble across something they once said at the exact moment you're thinking of letting go. These signs come wrapped in ordinary moments, but they hit with extraordinary precision. They find you when your heart is on the verge of closing, and they reopen doors your logic already shut. Many people mistake these patterns as mere coincidence. But coincidence doesn't have this kind of timing. Coincidence doesn't know how to land exactly when you're about to give up. God does. He speaks through your environment, your timelines, your interruption. When something continues to show up in your path uninvited yet oddly comforting, it's worth paying attention. Especially when your spirit responds to it, not with fear but with a quiet sense of recognition. Recurring confirmations don't force decisions. They soften your heart toward divine timing. They remind you that something deeper is at play, something orchestrated beyond your understanding. The way a number repeats, the way their favorite verse shows up during your devotional, the way a conversation suddenly circles back to a memory you share with them, all of it forms a language between your soul and heaven. God uses this language to speak to your patience, to your hope, to your endurance. And sometimes, it's not about seeing the person again, it's about recognizing that the story isn't finished. These signs don't always mean immediate reconciliation. They might be guiding you to pray for them, to heal parts of yourself still connected to them, or to prepare for something still ahead. But the point is this: when God is not done, He doesn't allow the message to fade. It returns, again and again, until you listen. You might question your sanity, wonder if you're just reading too much into things. But then the timing strikes again, so exact, so unexplainable, that your doubt becomes smaller than your wonder. That's not just nostalgia. That's divine alignment. Your spirit knows when something is speaking beyond coincidence. It responds not with obsession, but with awe. These confirmations become sacred echoes, proof that while others may dismiss the bond, heaven still acknowledges it. It's not about clinging or idolizing. It's about recognizing when God is still working behind the scenes, using repetition as reassurance. Because He knows your heart is tired. He knows letting go seems easier. But He also knows that real faith is sometimes found in the decision to keep walking by spiritual signals, not by sight. When you're about to move on, and something shows up again, pause. Ask yourself, why now? Why again? And if your spirit leans in instead of turning away, perhaps it's not just your heart holding on. Perhaps it's God reminding you gently, persistently, that what He has started, He is still in the process of finishing. And until He says it's over, the signs will keep showing up, not to confuse you, but to confirm you're still on sacred ground. There are moments in life when two people are separated, not by rejection, but by refinement. It's not a goodbye, it's a divine pause. A sacred intermission where each person is being shaped, broken, rebuilt, and called into deeper layers of themselves. And in this process, something mysterious happens. Their growth mirrors each other. What one is learning, the other is confronting. What one is healing, the other is being humbled by. Though physically apart, spiritually, they are aligned, walking parallel paths through invisible corridors of transformation. When God is not asking you to move on from someone, He often begins working on both of you in silence. It may feel like nothing is happening on the surface, no messages, no updates, no visible progress. Yet underneath the silence there's movement. You begin to notice that the very things you're facing, the habits you're breaking, the boundaries you're setting, the traumas you're unpacking, are the same themes they once struggled with too. It's as if God is synchronizing your souls, preparing both vessels for a connection that's rooted not in fantasy but in wholeness. Spiritual growth that mirrors is not about comparison. It's not about obsessing over whether the other person is doing the same work. It's about a deeper awareness that your path is being shaped in a way that makes you ready, not desperate for reunion. You begin to understand love through self-awareness, not just emotional need, and something inside of you begins to feel that the same process might be happening in them, even if you can't see it. This mirrored growth reveals itself in subtle but sacred ways. You hear a sermon about forgiveness, and days later you find yourself releasing resentment you didn't know you still carried. Later you find out through a mutual friend that they've also started counseling. Or you feel convicted to pray for their peace, only to be overwhelmed by a sense of calm afterward that feels like it was shared between two spirits connected beyond time and space. God often separates people, not to end their story, but to rebuild the foundation. He doesn't want the old wounds and insecurities to be dragged into something sacred. He knows that love rooted in brokenness leads to codependency, not partnership. So he calls each person into the wilderness, not to punish but to purify. And it's in that wilderness that growth begins to reflect. The further you go in your healing, the more you sense that the connection is still alive, not in the past but in the becoming. This mirrored spiritual growth is confirmation. You find that you're both being taught the value of patience, the weight of commitment, the humility of service. You're both learning to prioritize God over impulse, truth over comfort, and purpose over pleasure. And all the while your spirits are aligning. Not through communication, but through transformation. Sometimes God keeps you apart so you don't destroy something meant to be sacred by showing up too soon. He allows space for roots to go deeper, character to solidify, and identity to be anchored in Him, not in each other. And when the time is right, the reunion isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. Two people who have grown in the same soil of surrender finally meet again, not as fragments but as reflections of divine preparation. When you feel your own growth evolving in ways that once matched their struggles, or when your healing journey seems to echo their past pain, don't dismiss it. That's not random, that's refinement in rhythm. And it's one of the clearest signs that God is not asking you to move on, but to keep becoming. Because somewhere in the quiet they may be doing the same. There's a kind of love that doesn't loosen its grip. No matter how many times you try to let go, you've had the conversations with yourself. You've spoken the affirmations, deleted the photos, blocked the contact. You've done all the right things to move on. But no matter how much distance you place between you and them, something inside refuses to fully release. You try to unlove them, but the heart doesn't comply. This isn't obsession. It's not emotional weakness. It's something deeper, something sacred. A bond that feels rooted not just in shared memories, but in divine purpose. And when God is not asking you to move on, He allows love to remain, not as torment, but as an anchor. A quiet reminder that what was shared was not seasonal. It was sacred. You weren't just tied together by experiences. You were knit together by something eternal, something that defies time, absence, and even silence. There's a distinct difference between holding on to someone out of fear and not being able to unlove someone because of spiritual truth. The former keeps you stuck. The latter keeps you sensitive. When God is still working, He often doesn't allow the heart to shut down completely. Even when you beg Him to take the feelings away, they stay. Not to hurt you, but to hold you until His work is finished. You may go through phases where you feel like you've let go. You get through your day without thinking of them. You feel free, even relieved, but then something triggers a memory, a song, a scent, a moment, and that feeling floods back in. Not as chaos, but as stillness. Not as confusion, but as clarity. It's as if your spirit is saying, this love still matters. This connection is not gone. And it's in those moments you realize that this isn't a typical bond. This isn't the kind of love that fades with time or distance. It may shift. It may go quiet, but it doesn't die, because when love is planted by divine design, time doesn't decay it, it matures it, it deepens even in separation. You learn to carry it differently, not as a burden but as a sacred thread that keeps you grounded in something God still holds in his hands. Trying to unlove them often leads you back to prayer. You find yourself speaking their name to God even when you vowed not to. You ask for their healing, their joy, their safety, genuinely. That's not obsession. That's intercession. That's love that has been buried by distance, refined by silence. You don't want to control them. You just want them to walk in peace. That's how you know it's spiritual, not fleshly. When God is still writing the story, he doesn't give you the release others expect you to feel. You can't force yourself to feel indifferent. You may try to distract yourself, immerse in new relationships, or chase clarity through closure. But the heart doesn't lie. And when it keeps returning softly, consistently, it's because the love isn't finished doing what it was sent to do. This doesn't mean the story will look how you imagined. It doesn't guarantee reunion. But it does mean that the love has purpose, even if the path is different than you expected. And if you still love them in a way that brings peace rather than pain, conviction rather than confusion, then perhaps you're not meant to unlove them. Perhaps you're simply meant to love them differently, until God says otherwise. So when your heart refuses to detach, don't rush to label it weakness. It might just be evidence of God's hand still at work. Because real love, the kind that God authors, isn't easily undone. And if it still lives in you, soft, surrendered, unwavering, there's a reason you may not be holding on. You may simply be holding space. Not every relationship that bears fruit is loud, public, or constant. Sometimes the most meaningful connections go quiet, not because they've lost their value, but because something deeper is happening beneath the surface. Silence does not always mean absence. Distance does not always mean detachment. When God is still in a relationship, it continues to bear fruit even in the quiet. You may not be speaking to them anymore, you may not know what they're doing, where they are, or how they feel, but somehow you're still growing. And strangely, when you think about them, it's not with bitterness or regret, it's with gratitude, reflection, and even revelation. That's fruit, that's transformation. That's evidence of a connection still wrapped in divine hands, doing unseen work in both lives. There are relationships that are seasonal, and when they end, there's nothing left to harvest. They leave behind confusion, maybe even a scar. But when a connection is God-ordained, even its silent seasons have meaning. You start to notice growth in your responses, in your emotions, in your character. You handle things with more grace than before. You hear their name, and instead of reacting with pain, you pray with peace. You think of the past, and instead of wishing it away, you see the ways it shaped you. That's not just maturity, that's fruit. The fruit of a spiritual connection often comes in hidden forms. A softened heart, a deeper prayer life, a heightened sensitivity to God's voice. You may find yourself seeking God more earnestly, trusting His timing more faithfully, healing more holistically, and this quiet transformation often mirrors what they're walking through as well. Because when God plants a connection for his purposes, he nurtures it even when both people can't see it happening. Even in silence, the connection teaches. It teaches you how to love without control, how to hope without expectation, how to release without disconnecting from your own soul. You begin to understand that silence isn't punishment, it's space. Space where roots grow deeper, where emotions settle, where purpose matures. What you thought was an ending may actually be a sacred pause designed to protect what's being developed. There's also the fruit of faith. Every day you continue to trust without seeing, believe without hearing, and love without confirmation. You're being stretched, not by your own willpower, but by the spirit within you. That quiet waiting, that surrendered stillness is producing resilience. And one day, whether the story ends in reconnection or redirection, you'll realize how much stronger you became in the silence. The relationship, even in pause, still teaches you how to reflect rather than react. It shows you the layers of your own heart. It holds up a mirror to your wounds and desires. It calls you to heal, not just to reunite, but to become whole regardless of the outcome. And that kind of growth can't be measured by status updates or conversations. It's measured by internal shifts that realign your soul with God's plan. If you're in a place where everything between you and someone else has gone quiet, don't assume it's over. Ask yourself, am I still growing from it? Am I still learning, healing, surrendering, praying? If the answer is yes, then fruit is still being produced. And if fruit remains, the seed is still alive. Some stories are written in whispers. Some connections flourish in the soil of separation. And sometimes the silence is not a void, it's a vineyard. And the fruit is not seen immediately, but it's there ripening in secret, preparing for a harvest you never expected. There are times when your heart knows something that your mind can't fully explain, and your spirit holds on to a truth no one else seems to understand. You may find yourself standing in the middle of well-meaning voices, all telling you to let go, to move on, to forget. They give advice rooted in logic, in patterns, in past experience. And yet, something within you doesn't budge. There's a stillness that can't be shaken, a quiet confidence that defies all outside opinion. That's not stubbornness, that's spiritual discernment. When God places a connection in your life that He's not finished with, it will often feel confusing to the outside world. Others might look at the situation and see silence, distance, even pain, and interpret that as a sign to move on. But they don't feel what you feel. They don't hear what you hear in the quiet moments when you're alone with God. They don't carry the peace that floods you when you pray, or the assurance that comes when you surrender the outcome but still feel led to believe. Your spirit knows because it's aligned with a frequency higher than emotion and louder than opinion. There's a language between your soul and God that doesn't require words or validation. It's not easily explained because it's not designed to be. It's meant to be obeyed, not understood by others. That's why it can feel lonely. Because when God speaks personally, the confirmation is internal. You feel it in the weight of your prayers, in the steadiness of your heart, and in the fact that every time you try to let go, you're met with a spiritual resistance. Not fear, not desperation, just a divine not yet. People may label your hope as naivete. They might think you're holding on to a fantasy or stuck in the past. But hope rooted in God is not fantasy, it's faith. And when your faith is anchored in divine instruction rather than external validation, it won't always make sense to the people around you. That's okay, because it wasn't given to them. It was given to you. There's a sacred knowing that exists within your spirit, a sense that this connection, though challenged, still has purpose. It's not something you're forcing. You've tried to walk away, to close the chapter, but your peace disappears the moment you step outside of what God is telling you to hold space for. That tension becomes your compass. Every time you align your heart with God's will, that quiet knowing returns. It's what keeps you grounded when confusion tries to pull you away. This kind of knowing doesn't come from feelings alone. It comes through prayer, through fasting, through moments when your flesh is weary but your spirit remains awake. You don't chase signs, but you receive them. You don't demand outcomes, but you remain open. And through it all, you walk a path that others can't always walk with you. Because it's not their path, it's yours. There will be moments where the silence is deafening, and the lack of clarity weighs heavy. But even then, something within you refuses to give up. And that refusal is not born of pride or stubbornness, it's born of obedience. It's the result of encountering a connection that was never just about feelings but about faith, growth, timing and purpose. You may not be able to prove it to anyone. You may not be able to explain why you're still praying for them, still believing, still waiting. But deep down, your spirit knows. And that knowing is enough to keep walking. Even if you're walking alone. Because when God whispers truth into your soul, it doesn't matter who doubts it. What matters is that you don't. In the quiet spaces between questions and clarity, God often speaks the loudest. Throughout this journey, marked by uncertainty, silence, growth, and spiritual conviction, one truth remains. When He tells you not to move on, it's not without reason. Divine peace, repeated signs, mirrored transformation, unwavering love, fruit in silence, and deep spiritual knowing are not random. They're sacred indicators of a connection still under construction by heavenly hands. While the world urges you to release and rationalize, heaven may be calling you to hold space and trust. Not out of desperation, but out of divine obedience. Not because you're clinging to a fantasy, but because you're responding to a call only your spirit can hear. Sometimes what looks like delay is actually divine preparation, and what feels like silence is sacred strategy. So if your heart still holds a peace that logic can't explain, if you still witness signs that stir your spirit, if love continues to anchor you rather than break you, then perhaps you're not meant to move on just yet. Perhaps you're meant to wait, not idly but faithfully, until God finishes writing the part of the story only He can see. And in that surrender, you're not standing still, you're standing exactly where grace has placed you.